Marcus Johnson stood in his living room, running his hands along the newly installed quartz countertops. After 5 years of living in this suburban Atlanta home, he had transformed it from a dated 1990s property into a modern masterpiece. Every weekend spent installing hardwood floors, every contractor hired to renovate the bathrooms, and every careful decision about paint colors had led to this moment. At 35, Marcus had achieved what many considered the American dream. A graduate of Georgia Tech with a master's in software engineering, he had worked his way up to become a senior developer at a prestigious tech company. His three-bedroom, 2.5-bath home in the desirable Riverside neighborhood had been his pride and joy since the day he purchased it. The market's perfect for refinancing, his financial advisor had told him last week. With these interest rates, you could save hundreds each month. The suggestion made perfect sense to Marcus, who had always been meticulous about his finances. The only step left was getting the home appraised. Marcus's sister Lauren, a real estate agent in Chicago, had coached him on preparing for the appraisal. First impressions matter, she'd insisted during their FaceTime call. Following her advice, he had spent the entire weekend deep cleaning. The hardwood floors gleamed, the windows sparkled, and even the baseboards had been wiped down to perfection. Walking through his house one final time before the appraiser's arrival, Marcus checked off items on his mental list. The updated kitchen featured stainless steel appliances, soft close cabinets, and under-cabinet lighting. The main bathroom boasted a frameless glass shower and luxury vinyl tiles that perfectly mimicked marble. Even the backyard had been professionally landscaped with native plants and a stone patio perfect for entertaining. Marcus had done his research. Houses in his neighborhood had been selling for around $850,000, and many had fewer upgrades than his home. He pulled up Zillow on his phone, scrolling through recent sales. The house 3 doors down, slightly smaller than his and with an outdated kitchen, had sold for $875,000 just last month. The doorbell rang at exactly 2:00 p.m. Marcus straightened his collar and opened the door with a warm smile. The appraiser, a middle-aged woman named Patricia Weber, barely met his eyes as she introduced herself. "I'll need about an hour to complete the inspection," she said, her voice clipped and professional. "You can either stay or leave. It's up to you." Marcus had planned to work from his home office anyway, so he decided to stay. "I'll be upstairs if you need anything," he offered. "Please feel free to look around thoroughly. We've made quite a few improvements since I bought the place." Patricia nodded curtly and began taking photos of the entryway. As Marcus headed upstairs, he couldn't shake the feeling that something felt off about her demeanor. Still, he reminded himself not to read too much into it. She was probably just focused on her work. From his office, Marcus could hear Patricia's footsteps moving through the house. The sound of cabinet doors opening and closing, the click of her camera, the scratch of her pen on paper. Occasionally, he caught glimpses of her through the security cameras he monitored on his computer screen, standard equipment for his smart home setup. What he noticed made him increasingly uneasy. Patricia seemed to rush through certain rooms, barely glancing at the high-end fixtures he had carefully selected. In the kitchen, she spent more time looking at the family photos on the refrigerator, pictures of Marcus with his parents at his graduation, snapshots from family reunions, than examining the premium appliances or custom cabinetry. An hour later, Patricia called up the stairs. "I'm finished, Mr. Johnson. You'll receive the report within 3 business days." Marcus came down to see her out. "Thank you for your time," he said, extending his hand. Patricia gave it a quick shake, her eyes already focused on her car in the driveway. As he watched her drive away, Marcus couldn't ignore the knot forming in his stomach. He had witnessed similar subtle shifts in behavior throughout his career. The slight change in someone's demeanor when they realized who they were dealing with, the barely disguised discomfort, the rushed interactions. "Don't jump to conclusions," he told himself firmly. "Wait for the report." But as he stood in his doorway, looking at the home he had poured his heart and savings into, Marcus Johnson couldn't shake the feeling that this appraisal was about to become more than just a routine refinancing step. He pulled out his phone and called Lauren. Something told him he might need his sister's real estate expertise sooner rather than later. 3 days turned into a week, and Marcus still hadn't received the appraisal report. Every email notification made him jump, expecting news about his home's valuation. When the report finally arrived in his inbox on a Tuesday morning, he had to read it twice to make sure he wasn't seeing things wrong. $498,000. Marcus stared at the number until his eyes burned. This couldn't be right. He had purchased the home 5 years ago for $525,000, and that was before spending over $100,000 on improvements. Property values in his neighborhood had skyrocketed since then, with similar homes selling for nearly double this amount. His hands shaking slightly, Marcus dialed Lauren's number. She answered on the second ring. "Tell me you got good news," his sister said by way of greeting. "They valued it at $498,000, Marcus replied, his voice hollow. The silence on the other end lasted several seconds. "That's impossible," Lauren finally said. "Send me the report, right now." Marcus forwarded the email while keeping Lauren on the line. He could hear her typing and clicking as she reviewed the document. "This is ridiculous," she muttered. "She's using comparables from a completely different neighborhood, one that's 5 miles away and nowhere near as developed as yours. She's completely ignored the recent sales on your street. And look at this, she's marked your kitchen upgrades as minor cosmetic improvements when you did a complete renovation." Marcus sank into his office chair, memories of Patricia Weber's rushed inspection flooding back. "I knew something felt off during the appraisal," he said quietly. "This isn't off, Marcus. This is wrong." Lauren's voice had taken on the sharp tone she used when dealing with difficult real estate transactions. "I'm sending you some data right now. 3 houses on your street sold in the last 2 months. All smaller than yours, all with fewer upgrades. Know what the lowest one went for? $790,000. Marcus opened the files Lauren had sent, comparing the photos of recently sold homes to his own. The evidence was undeniable. His house was clearly undervalued by hundreds of thousands of dollars. "What do I do?" he asked, running a hand over his face. "First, we appeal this appraisal. I'm sending you the form now. Second, we document everything. And I mean everything. When she arrived, how she behaved, how long she spent in each room. Do you still have your security camera footage from that day?" "Yes, all of it." "Good, save it. We're going to need it." Lauren paused. "And Marcus, I think we need to consider that this might not be just incompetence." Marcus knew what his sister was suggesting. He had dealt with enough discrimination in his life to recognize its patterns, but facing it in this context, in his own home, made his chest tight with anger and frustration. "I want to try something," Lauren continued when Marcus didn't respond. "Remember my colleague Sarah, the one who helped stage that house in Oak Park last year? The blonde woman from your Christmas party? Yes, she's willing to help us. I think we should schedule another appraisal, but this time, let's have Sarah present as the homeowner. We'll remove your family photos, your art collection, anything that might indicate the house belongs to a black owner." Marcus stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the neighborhood he had chosen, the community he had worked so hard to be part of. "You really think we need to go that far?" "I think we need to prove what's really happening here. Because if it's what we suspect, Marcus, this isn't just about your refinancing. This is about every other homeowner who might be getting cheated because of their race." After a long moment, Marcus nodded, even though his sister couldn't see him. "Okay, set it up. I'll make some calls. We'll get a different appraisal company, obviously. And Marcus, document everything from now on. Every phone call, every email. We might need it later." After ending the call, Marcus walked through his house again, seeing it through Patricia Weber's eyes. The gleaming hardwood floors she had barely glanced at. The custom kitchen she had dismissed. The carefully chosen artwork that reflected his heritage, pieces he would now have to hide. He stopped in front of a family photo taken at his parents' 40th anniversary celebration. As he took it down from the wall, his father's voice echoed in his memory. "Sometimes, son, you have to fight twice as hard just to be treated fairly." "Well, Dad," Marcus whispered, carefully wrapping the frame in bubble wrap, "looks like it's time to fight." The transformation of Marcus's home took 3 hours. Sarah, Lauren's colleague, arrived early on Saturday morning to help remove anything that might indicate the house belonged to a black family. Each personal item they packed away felt like erasing a piece of Marcus's identity. "The art pieces can go in these storage bins," Sarah said, carefully wrapping the vibrant African prints that usually hung in the living room. Marcus watched as she replaced them with generic landscape paintings from her own collection. Family photos disappeared into boxes. The vintage jazz album covers that Marcus had framed for his music room came down. The collection of books by Black authors that filled his office shelves were temporarily replaced with Sarah's mystery novels and coffee table books. "This feels wrong," Marcus muttered, packing away the graduation photo of him and his parents from Georgia Tech. Sarah paused, a generic beige throw pillow in her hands. "I know," she said softly. "But if we're right about what happened with the first appraisal, we need to document it." The new appraiser was scheduled for 2:00 p.m. His name was Richard Martinez, from a different company than Patricia Weber. At 1:30, Marcus reluctantly left his own home, feeling like a stranger sneaking away from the place he had poured his heart into. "Remember," Sarah said as Marcus prepared to leave, "I'll record everything on my phone, just like we discussed. And I'll tell them exactly what you told the first appraiser about the improvements." From his car parked 2 blocks away, Marcus watched Richard Martinez arrive right on time. Through the security camera app on his phone, he observed the inspection. The difference was immediately noticeable. Martinez spent nearly 2 hours examining the house. He measured rooms carefully, took detailed photos of the improvements, and made extensive notes about the high-end finishes. Sarah followed the script they had prepared, pointing out the same features Marcus had highlighted during the first appraisal. "The kitchen renovation was completed 2 years ago," she explained, repeating Marcus's words exactly. "All appliances are premium grade, and the countertops are quartz." Martinez nodded appreciatively. "Beautiful work," he said, running his hand along the counter. "And these soft close cabinets are top of the line." Through the camera feed, Marcus watched Martinez examine every detail he had pointed out to Patricia Weber, details she had rushed past or ignored completely. The appraiser spent 20 minutes in the kitchen alone, compared to Weber's 5. "The bathroom renovations are impressive," Martinez commented upstairs. "The tile work is excellent. And is this a smart home system?" "Yes," Sarah replied. "Everything from the thermostats to the security system is integrated." When Martinez finally finished, he spent another 15 minutes sitting at the dining room table, reviewing his notes and checking something on his tablet. "The market in this neighborhood is very strong," he told Sarah. "And this home has been exceptionally well maintained and upgraded." After Martinez left, Marcus waited 30 minutes before returning home. He found Sarah sitting at his kitchen island, looking thoughtful. "Well?" he asked. "Night and day difference," she replied. "He examined everything thoroughly, made positive comments about all the features, took time to really understand the improvements." She paused. "He also mentioned that he's seen several recent sales in this neighborhood over 800,000. Marcus leaned against the counter, processing this information. "How long until we get his report?" He said 3 to 5 business days. Sarah started gathering her things. "Want me to help put everything back?" Marcus looked around at his transformed home, the generic art, the bland decorations, the absence of anything personal. "No," he said finally. "Let's wait until we get the report. Document everything exactly as it was during this appraisal." Later that evening, after Sarah left, Marcus sat in his stripped-down living room. The space felt hollow, like a model home staged for sale rather than a place where someone actually lived. His phone buzzed with a text from Lauren. "How did it go?" she asked. Marcus typed back, "Different appraiser, different attitude. We'll see what the numbers say." "We'll fight this," Lauren replied. "Whatever the report shows." Marcus looked at the empty walls where his family photos used to hang. He thought about other black homeowners who might have faced the same situation but didn't have the resources or knowledge to challenge it. "Yes," he texted back. "We will." 4 days later, Marcus was in the middle of a work meeting when the second appraisal report arrived in his inbox. His heart racing, he quickly excused himself from the video call and opened the document. $785,000. He blinked hard and looked again. The number didn't change. The second appraisal had come in $287,000 higher than the first one. Same house, same improvements, same market conditions, but a different perceived owner. Marcus's hands were shaking as he called Lauren. She answered immediately. "Did you get it?" she asked. "$785,000, Marcus said, his voice tight with emotion. Almost $300,000 more than the first appraisal. I'm logging in now, Lauren said. He could hear her typing. Send me both reports. I want to compare them side by side. For the next 20 minutes, they went through the reports together. The differences were striking. Where Patricia Weber had marked his kitchen as having minor updates, Richard Martinez detailed the extensive high-end renovation with premium appliances and custom cabinetry. Weber's report used comparable sales from a less affluent neighborhood miles away. Martinez's report cited recent sales from Marcus's own street. Look at this, Lauren said. Martinez's report includes 16 photos of the interior upgrades. Weber's has only 5, and they're all poorly lit, almost like she was rushing. She was rushing, Marcus said quietly. I watched her through the security cameras. She spent less than half the time Martinez did examining the house. There was a long pause on the line. Marcus, Lauren finally said, this is textbook housing discrimination. We have everything documented. The huge valuation difference, the security footage showing different treatment, the clearly biased selection of comparables in the first report. We need to take action. Marcus stared out his home office window. The magnitude of what they had uncovered was starting to sink in. What's the next step? First, we file a complaint with the Department of Housing and Urban Development. I'm sending you the link now. Then we contact the Fair Housing Center. They have lawyers who specialize in cases like this. And then we make some noise. This isn't just about your refinancing anymore. This is about exposing a systemic problem. Marcus opened his laptop and started filling out the HUD complaint form. As he documented the events of the past 2 weeks, his initial shock began to transform into determination. I want to reach out to the local news, he said. People need to know this is happening. I agree, Lauren replied. I have a contact at Channel 11. She's been looking for stories about housing discrimination. But Marcus, are you ready for what that might mean? Going public with this could bring a lot of attention, not all of it positive. Marcus looked around his office. The walls were still bare, his personal items still packed away in boxes. The space felt foreign, like the mask he'd had to wear to get a fair appraisal of his own home. I'm ready, he said firmly. If this happened to me, a software engineer with resources and knowledge of the system, imagine how many other homeowners have been cheated without even knowing it. Okay then, Lauren said. I'll make some calls. But first, let's get your house back to normal. Put your photos back up. Hang your art. Make it your home again. After ending the call, Marcus opened the boxes they had packed for the second appraisal. One by one, he restored his family photos to their places. He rehung the African prints in the living room, returned his books to their shelves, and put his jazz album covers back on display. As he worked, he thought about the numbers. $287,000. The difference wasn't just money. It represented something much darker. It was the price of his race, quantified in dollars and cents by a system that still saw his skin color as a devaluing factor. His phone buzzed with a text from Lauren. Channel 11 wants to interview you tomorrow. Their investigative team is interested. Are you sure about this? Marcus looked at the newly restored photo of his parents at his graduation. They had always taught him to stand up against injustice, not just for himself, but for others who might face the same barriers. Yes, he texted back. It's time to tell this story. The Channel 11 news van parked outside Marcus's house drew curious looks from his neighbors. Inside, reporter Dana Chen helped adjust the lighting while her cameraman set up equipment in Marcus's living room. We'll start with your initial experience, Dana explained, positioning her chair. Then we'll show the evidence. Both appraisal reports, the security footage, everything. Are you ready? Marcus nodded, straightening his tie. His sister Lauren sat off camera, giving him an encouraging thumbs up. The red light on the camera blinked on. What made you first suspect something was wrong with your appraisal? Dana asked. Marcus told the story clearly and calmly, just as he had practiced. He described Patricia Weber's rushed inspection, the surprisingly low valuation, and the experiment with Sarah that revealed the stark difference in treatment. The numbers speak for themselves, he said, holding up both reports. Same house, same market, same improvements. The only difference was who appeared to own the home. Dana nodded seriously. And you have security footage of both appraisals? Lauren handed over a tablet showing side-by-side video clips. The contrast was striking. Weber's hurried walkthrough versus Martinez's thorough inspection. This story isn't just about me, Marcus continued. It's about every homeowner who might have faced similar discrimination without realizing it. How many families have lost equity? How many refinancing applications were denied? How many dreams of building generational wealth were stunted? After the interview, Dana stayed to film additional footage of the house and its improvements. As her cameraman captured shots of the kitchen renovation, she pulled Marcus aside. "We're running this story tomorrow night," she said quietly. "But there's something else you should know. After we started investigating, 3 other homeowners in the metro area contacted us with similar experiences. Would you be willing to meet with them?" Before Marcus could respond, his phone buzzed with an email notification. The sender was Patricia Weber's appraisal company. "We have become aware of your concerns regarding a recent appraisal," the message began. "We take such allegations seriously and would like to schedule a meeting to discuss this matter privately." Marcus showed the email to Lauren, who scoffed. "Now they want to talk? After we have evidence. Forward that to the fair housing lawyers." Dana read the email over their shoulders. "Classic damage control," she said. "They probably heard we were investigating. Do you mind if we include this in the story?" "Include everything," Marcus replied firmly. That evening, after the news team left, Marcus's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. The story hadn't even aired yet, but word was spreading through real estate and banking circles. Local housing advocacy groups wanted to meet. Other news outlets were requesting interviews. "You're going to need help managing this," Lauren said, scrolling through his messages. "This is getting bigger than we expected." Marcus sat at his kitchen island, looking at a new email that had just arrived. It was from a black couple in another state who had lost their home because of a suspiciously low appraisal that led to a denied refinancing application. "That's exactly what needs to happen," he said. "This needs to get bigger. The whole system needs to be exposed." Lauren squeezed his shoulder supportively. "Are you ready for what comes next? Once that story airs tomorrow, there's no going back." Marcus walked to his living room window. The news van was gone, but he could see neighbors still glancing curiously at his house as they walked by. He thought about the carefully documented evidence they had gathered, the stark difference in valuations, the security footage showing clear disparities in treatment, the paper trail that proved what many had long suspected but struggled to prove. "I'm ready," he said. Sometimes change only happens when someone is willing to stand up and say enough. His phone buzzed again. Another email from someone claiming to have experienced similar discrimination. Marcus opened his laptop and started a new document, organizing the growing evidence of a systemic problem that could no longer be ignored or denied. Tomorrow, his story would air. Tomorrow, the private struggle would become public. Tomorrow, the fight for change would begin in earnest. But tonight, in his properly valued home, surrounded by the family photos and artwork that told his story, Marcus Johnson prepared for battle. The morning after Channel 11's broadcast, Marcus's story exploded. His phone started ringing at 6 a.m. with calls from national news networks. By noon, the video of his interview had gone viral on social media, with millions of views and thousands of comments. "You need to see this," Lauren said, forwarding him an email. It was from a national civil rights organization requesting his participation in a class action lawsuit. They had already identified 37 similar cases across 12 states. Marcus sat in his home office, watching his story spread across different news channels. Each station showed the damning side-by-side comparison of the appraisals, highlighting the $287,000 difference. Housing experts appeared on morning shows, explaining how systemic bias in home valuations affected generational wealth in minority communities. "Mr. Johnson," one expert said on screen, "has provided what we've rarely had before: clear, documented evidence of housing discrimination in real time." At 2 p.m., Marcus's doorbell rang. A process server handed him an envelope. Patricia Weber's appraisal company was threatening legal action if he didn't retract his statements. Lauren, who had anticipated this, immediately forwarded the document to their legal team. "They're scared," she said. "They know more cases are coming." She was right. By evening, Marcus had received over 200 emails from homeowners sharing similar experiences. Some attached their appraisal reports as proof. Others described how they'd lost opportunities for refinancing or selling their homes due to suspiciously low valuations. A housing advocate named Dr. Janelle Thompson reached out with research she'd been conducting for years. "Your case proves what we've been saying," she wrote. "The data shows this isn't isolated, it's systematic. Would you be willing to testify before a state housing committee?" Marcus could feel the momentum building. What had started as his personal fight was becoming a movement. The Department of Housing and Urban Development called to confirm they were launching a formal investigation into discriminatory appraisal practices. Local real estate agents began sharing their own stories. One sent Marcus a spreadsheet tracking suspicious patterns in home valuations across different neighborhoods. Another provided evidence of identical homes receiving drastically different appraisals based on the owner's race. "The industry can't ignore this anymore," Lauren told him as they reviewed the mounting evidence. "You've opened the floodgates." By nightfall, Marcus's story had reached Washington. A congressional representative announced plans to introduce legislation requiring mandatory bias training for appraisers and regular audits of valuation disparities. Patricia Weber's company issued a carefully worded statement. "We are conducting an internal review of our practices and procedures. We remain committed to fair and equitable treatment of all homeowners." Marcus almost laughed at the corporate doublespeak, but then he received an email that sobered him. It was from a young black couple in Michigan who had lost their dream home because their appraisal came in too low for their mortgage to be approved. "If we had known what you know now," they wrote, "we might still have our home. Thank you for fighting this fight." That evening, Marcus hosted a video call with 5 other homeowners who had experienced similar discrimination. They shared their stories, compared documentation, and began planning a coordinated response. "We need to keep the pressure on," said one participant, a retired teacher from Florida. "This isn't just about getting fair values for our homes. It's about changing a system that's been unfair for generations." As Marcus prepared for bed that night, Lauren sent him one final message. She had compiled a list of media appearances and speaking engagements requested for the next week. CNN, MSNBC, major newspapers, housing conferences. Everyone wanted to hear his story. "Are you ready for this?" she asked. "Because tomorrow's going to be even busier." Marcus looked around his home, the home that had been deemed worth $287,000 less simply because he owned it. He thought about the hundreds of emails in his inbox, each representing another family that had faced similar discrimination. "I'm ready," he replied. "This was never just about my house. It's about making sure every homeowner gets a fair valuation, regardless of their race." He set his alarm early. Tomorrow would bring more interviews, more evidence gathering, more fighting. But tonight, he had helped expose a truth that could no longer be hidden or denied. The system that had worked in shadows was finally being dragged into the light. 1 month after Marcus's story went public, the impact continued to ripple through the housing industry. He sat in a packed state legislative chamber, preparing to testify about his experience. The room was filled with homeowners, industry experts, and media representatives. "The evidence is undeniable," Marcus stated into the microphone, his voice steady. "When we removed any indication that I, a black man, owned the home." Behind him sat dozens of homeowners who had come forward with similar stories. The class action lawsuit had grown to include over 200 plaintiffs from across the country. Patricia Weber's appraisal company was now under federal investigation. During his testimony, Marcus presented the mounting evidence: statistics showing widespread valuation disparities, documented cases of discrimination, and expert analysis revealing systematic bias in the appraisal industry. The legislators listened intently, many taking notes. "Since sharing my story," Marcus continued, "I've heard from countless families who lost opportunities for refinancing, couldn't sell their homes for fair value, or were denied mortgages because of biased appraisals. This has to stop." The hearing lasted for hours. Industry representatives tried to defend their practices, but their arguments felt hollow against the weight of evidence. One by one, other homeowners shared their experiences, creating a powerful narrative of systemic discrimination. After the hearing, Marcus met with Dr. Thompson, a housing advocate who had reached out earlier. She had analyzed hundreds of cases and found a clear pattern of undervaluation in minority neighborhoods. "Your case was the catalyst we needed," she told him. The industry can't claim these are isolated incidents anymore. The data proves this is systematic discrimination. That evening, Marcus received news that changed everything. The Department of Housing and Urban Development announced sweeping new regulations for the appraisal industry. All appraisers would now be required to complete extensive anti-bias training, use standardized criteria for home valuations, submit detailed reports justifying their comparable property selections, undergo regular audits to check for valuation disparities, face severe penalties for discriminatory practices. Patricia Weber's license was suspended pending investigation. Her company faced heavy fines and mandatory oversight. Other appraisal companies rushed to implement new policies and procedures to avoid similar consequences. Lauren called Marcus as soon as the news broke. "They're actually making real changes," she said excitedly. "Your case helped make this happen." But the most significant change came from an unexpected source. Several major banks and lending institutions announced they would review past appraisals in minority neighborhoods. They established funds to compensate homeowners who could prove they had received unfairly low valuations. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from the young couple in Michigan who had lost their home. They had qualified for compensation under one of the new programs and would finally be able to buy a house again. "Your courage in speaking up gave us a second chance," they wrote. The media attention had begun to fade, but the impact of Marcus's story continued to grow. Real estate associations across the country developed new guidelines for fair valuations. Housing advocacy groups used his case to push for stronger anti-discrimination laws. Late one evening, as Marcus sat in his home office reviewing emails from other homeowners, he received an unexpected message. It was from a young appraiser in training. "I watched your testimony," she wrote. "I'm entering this industry determined to be part of the solution, not the problem. Thank you for showing us what needs to change." Marcus looked around his home, the same home that had sparked this movement for change. The family photos were back on the walls. The African artwork hung proudly in the living room. Everything that made this house his home was displayed without fear or hesitation. His phone rang. It was Lauren. "The state board just voted on the new appraisal regulations," she said. "They passed unanimously. Starting next month, every appraiser in the state will have to follow the new guidelines." Marcus smiled, thinking about all the families who would benefit from these changes. His fight had helped create real, lasting reform in an industry that had resisted change for too long. "We're not done yet," he told Lauren, "but we're getting there." Outside his window, a young black couple walked by, looking at houses in the neighborhood. Thanks to the changes Marcus had helped create, they would have a better chance at a fair valuation when they found their dream home. That, he realized, was worth every moment of this fight. 1 year after Marcus Johnson's first appraisal, he stood at a podium in Washington, D.C., addressing a national housing conference. The room was filled with industry leaders, government officials, and housing advocates eager to hear from the man whose case had transformed the appraisal industry. "Change doesn't happen overnight," Marcus began, looking out at the crowd. "But when we stand together and expose injustice, real transformation is possible." The past year had brought significant victories. The class action lawsuit had been settled for $400 million, with funds going to thousands of homeowners who had experienced discrimination. Patricia Weber's company had been forced to overhaul its entire operation, and she had permanently lost her appraisal license. But more importantly, the industry had undergone a fundamental shift. The new federal guidelines Marcus had helped inspire were showing promising results. Early data indicated a significant reduction in valuation disparities across racial lines. After his speech, a group of homeowners approached him. They had all been part of the original lawsuit, and each had a story to share. "I finally got a fair appraisal on my house," one woman told him, tears in her eyes. "After 10 years of being undervalued, my home is worth what it should have been all along." Marcus's own home had been reappraised under the new guidelines, coming in at $815,000, even higher than the second appraisal from a year ago. But the value of his property wasn't what mattered most to him anymore. Later that afternoon, Marcus participated in a panel discussion with Dr. Thompson and other housing experts. They presented data showing the impact of the new regulations. A 60% reduction in racial valuation gaps, increased approval rates for minority homeowners' refinancing applications, and more equitable property assessments across different neighborhoods. Mr. Johnson's case didn't just expose one instance of discrimination. Dr. Thompson explained. It provided the evidence we needed to prove this was a systemic problem requiring systemic solutions. The changes extended beyond the appraisal industry. Banks had revised their lending practices. Real estate agents had received new training on recognizing and reporting potential discrimination. Even local tax assessors were reviewing their procedures to ensure fair treatment. During a break in the conference, Marcus checked his email. The young Michigan couple who had lost their home had sent him photos of their new house, purchased with help from the compensation fund established after the lawsuit. "Our children will grow up in a home that was fairly valued," they wrote. "Thank you for making that possible." Lauren, who had flown in for the conference, found Marcus looking at the photos. "Remember when this was just about refinancing your house?" she asked with a smile. Marcus nodded, thinking back to that first appraisal. What had started as his personal fight had grown into a movement that was changing lives across the country. The conference's final session focused on the future. New technologies were being developed to help eliminate bias from the appraisal process. Artificial intelligence systems, trained on fair market data, would serve as a check against human prejudice. Standardized procedures would ensure consistent valuations regardless of the homeowner's race. As the day ended, Marcus returned to his hotel room and called his parents. They had watched his speech online. "We're so proud of you," his mother said. "You didn't just fight for yourself, you fought for everyone who comes after you." That night, Marcus thought about the legacy of his case. The industry would never be perfect, but it had taken significant steps toward fairness and equity. Future generations of homeowners would face fewer barriers because of the changes he had helped create. His phone buzzed with one last message. It was from a high school teacher in Atlanta who wanted him to speak to her economics class about housing discrimination and the power of standing up for change. "My students need to know that one person can make a difference," she wrote. Marcus thought about his journey, from a homeowner facing discrimination to a catalyst for national change. He thought about all the families who would now receive fair valuations, all the wealth that would be built, all the dreams that would be possible. He replied to the teacher's message, "I'd be honored to speak to your class." Because that's what this had always been about, not just correcting past injustices, but building a better future for everyone. Marcus Johnson had started this journey alone in his undervalued home. He was ending it surrounded by thousands of allies, all working together to ensure every home and every homeowner received the fair treatment they deserved.